welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of an absolutely delightful book. It is the third in a series of connected novels of delicious paranormal rom-coms. I am so excited to discuss them. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Jenna Levine, and my book that I'm here to talk about today is called Road Trip with a Vampire. Um, I think the title does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to describing the book. So, if you've read the title, you kind of know what you're getting into or what you're in for. But as you mentioned, it is the third in a series of light-hearted comedic paranormals, though you don't need to have read the other two to follow this one. And it follows a witch named Zelda, who is she used to be a bad girl, got up to a lot of nonsense with her powers, and one day just woke up and was like, you know what, I need a fresh start. And she swore off, she used to be friends with vampires, swore off of them, leaves a very kind of normal coexistence in California until one day, out of the blue, a vampire shows up on her doorstep. And together they have a road trip, as the title suggests, both sort of searching for something. And it's a romance. So, hijinks ensue along the way.
It's a great description, and
Thank
you
you.
are absolutely correct about the title. It has like the directness of snakes on a plane, where like
Yes.
it tells you what to expect, but I'm still, so intrigued just by that combination of words. It's excellent. So, could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer and the other books in the My Vampire series?
Yeah, so my journey as a writer is not a typical one. Have spent most of my adult life in a very different kind of career. Um, I've always written, as a hobby, as something to entertain myself. I wrote a fair bit of fan fiction under different pen names online, but I really kind of viewed writing a novel as a bucket list item. Like, when I'm retired, when my daughter's out of school later. Um, the pandemic came along, and my husband and I, right before the pandemic, had accepted great new jobs in an area of the country we didn't know a soul in. But, wonderful, exciting new professional opportunities. The pandemic hit right before we moved here, and we were just kind of like in our house, isolated. And I had a real solid feeling of like it's now or never. I think that kind of only comes maybe when you're in crisis or not doing well mentally. I'm not sure. But I love comedy, and I love really kind of goofball comedy. And during the pandemic, early on in the pandemic, I discovered this show called What We Do in the Shadows, which is it's sort of a cult kind of hit, and it follows a found family of misfit vampires who are they're tasked with taking over the world, but they're doing a real bad job of it. And they live in Staten Island, and it's just like 30 minutes of silliness that, just makes you laugh. And I've always loved romance novels, and in my pandemic era, maybe not too stable grip on things mine, I was like, what if the vibes of this silly show, but make it a rom-com? And I had just finished reading Beth O'Leary's The Flat Share, which is one of my favorite romances. And, it's two roommates who it's going to work out because he works nights, she works days. They'll never see each other. And so I was like, what if that, but vampires, and it's silly. And so that's sort of the summary of my first book, which is called My Roommate is a Vampire, which is also very descriptive. And I think it was right time, right place because there was just a lot of interest really quickly, and the getting an agent, getting a publisher process was just very fast. And yeah, that was sort of I don't want to say it feels like I fell into it, but because I'd been writing for a very long time, but being a novelist was definitely a detour in the road, if I can borrow. But it's one that I haven't regretted for a second. It's been the best detour of my life, and I'm having a fabulous time.
Wow. That is so cool. And I am endlessly fascinated and surprised by how the pandemic spurred not just so many books, but so many writing careers. Like it's
Mhm.
5 years later, and authors are still talking about it as periods in which they began their careers or incubated their books or wrote them in their
Yeah,
entirety.
yeah.
It is like I don't want to try to be like, oh, there was a silver lining, but like, it's just fascinating that there was this flip side to what was like a super stressful, awful time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, it was a time of like deep reflection. And yeah, no, it's kind of amazing as well. But I guess in hindsight, I'm also not too surprised that people began radically different chapters of their lives during that truly awful period.
And we were alone with our brains, I guess so. And we thought of a lot of ideas like
Yes, so much time alone with our brains.
So I'd love to talk about Zelda, and I have a question first about how she sort of like connects your let's call it like a constellation of novels.
Yeah,
She appears in one of them previously,
yes,
and now she's given her own focus and her own
yes,
journey. And I'm
yes.
curious about like when you introduced her, did you know that she would eventually be her own protagonist, or did that sort of emerge in the process of fleshing her out?
So my editor played a huge role in Zelda getting her own novel. I knew I wanted to revisit her, so she's in my second book, mentioned kind of in passing, but mostly by reputation. And I sort of imply in the epilogue that she is a more important character to the overall story than she would have been that then like her role in the second book would suggest. But my editor really was like, she needs a book. And I knew I wanted her in the third book, but it was really my editor's encouragement that made her sort of the focal point of the story. And, I tell people that I see a little bit of myself in so I've written three books. They're romances, so there's six main characters. I see a little bit of myself in almost all of them, except for Peter, who is the other protagonist in this book. He and I have nothing in common, really. He's good at fixing cars. I wouldn't have the foggiest idea. But I do see myself in Zelda a little bit. Zelda keeps a lot of things that are central to who she is as a person bottled up deeply inside because she feels shame about them. And bottling those things up leads to all sorts of negative other ramifications. And, I feel like, maybe for a good chunk of my life, in my other career, felt like I had to suppress a lot of like my creativity and not quite the same thing, but I definitely related to her as I was writing her a lot more than I expected to, especially since I'm not an immortal witch with powerful magic. But yeah,
I resonated with her a lot, or she resonated with me. I really am interested in let- I don't redemption arcs, I guess, or like
yeah,
intense emotional journeys of that kind. I think in my 20s, I was like less interested in them because I had more like moral absolutes. But now, like in my early 40s, I'm like, yes, redeem me, please. Like, that's great.
Yes, and I think similarly, I'm a little further along life's journey than you are. Um, but I think the same. Like when I was in my 20s, I think we all, I mean, I'm projecting here, but the world is very black and white. There's good and bad. And then as you move through life, I think it makes it easier to see the nuance in situations, in people, and in ourselves. And so I'm really happy that that part resonated with you. It was a very important part of the story to me as well.
So let's talk a little bit about Peter as well, who we've
Mhm.
mentioned. I'd love to talk about shaping him, especially knowing now that he has nothing in common with you. That's very interesting. And how did you shape their dynamic and the tension between them?
So that's a really good and hard question. I knew, so like at core, I wanted this to be a Grumpy Sunshine novel. Partly because I'd never quite written that before and I love reading it. And so like at the outset, so like Zelda kind of sprung into my mind fully formed, like who she was, what her journey was, what her personality was. And Peter, I really wanted to be his own character, but also a foil to her. And I wanted, she's sort of this bright, bubbly person. She's a dark past that she feels a lot of shame over, but she is vivacious. And even the bad things she did in the past were born out of a sense of fun and wanting to live, vivaciously. And I really wanted Peter to be not those things because I'd never explored that kind of dynamic and romance before. But when I read it, I just eat it up with a spoon. So I knew I wanted him to be sort of the stoic, grumpy guy. They go to some ridiculous places on their road trip, most of which were inspired by places I have actually been, even the chicken restaurant. Um, and I wanted her to just be delighted by them and have him be like, "What are these singing chickens?" So there was a lot of that, but I wanted both of them to need redemption arcs because I felt like the best way, sort of, for them to accept themselves was to find a partner who accepted them, flaws and all. I just thought it would be kind of an interesting way. They had to sort of convince each other that they were worthy of forgiveness and redemption. And so that's kind of, I sort of feel like the redemption arcs are kind of tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love like the d device or the circumstance of a road trip because it isolates people together and they spend a
Hmm.
lot of time like talking and getting to know each other because like there's not a lot to do for long portions
There
of
sure is not.
trips.
For anyone who's driven across the country, they'll know that.
While it also puts them out in the world doing like new things and having new experiences together, which is like it's sort of like is a it like is a fast track incubation of a relationship in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when there's only one bed at the crappy motel.
Yeah.
How did this happen? No, I agree. Which is part of why I wanted to have a road trip be sort of the catalyst for everything in this story.
I'd love to talk about the role of humor in the book, especially in crafting like their romantic tension, their dynamic. The banter is amazing. Like you're very, very good
Thank you.
at banter that is like just so it endears you to them and it endears them to each other. But humor is complicated in a lot of ways because it can build intimacy, but it can also be defensive and create distance, you know? So like can you talk
Yeah.
about how you navigate that?
Um, so I love writing comedy. I actually think this is my least comedic of the three books. Um, and I found it really, I think, and this book also deals with some heavier themes
Mhm.
than the first two. So I definitely found the balance, but comedy is also very important to me. and humor in everything that I write. So it was hard with this particular book, given, I guess, particularly what Peter's backstory ends up being. Um, I wanted sort of the comedy to be situational rather than at either of the characters' expense.
Mm.
And so I wanted a lot of the comedy to be in their different reactions to ridiculous situations that they found themselves in. I sort of think that it's always kind of funny when you have a really powerful, attractive, sexy, competent man in fish out of water situations. Like that will never stop being kind of funny at me for me. And so, I wanted the comedy to be situational, but I think to the extent, like I think comedy is always most fun when it's kind of punching up. And I think if we're poking gentle fun at this otherwise competent, very sexy man, um, but gentle fun, like laughing with him, not at him, that can be. But I didn't want the banter to be mean-spirited. I didn't want them to be playing pranks on each other. But I'm really glad that you also found comedic elements in this book because I struggled with that a lot in writing it. So I'm thrilled that you think I pulled it off.
Yeah. I mean, that is like a really hard line to walk when you're balancing the comedy with these darker elements.
Yeah,
But I also think that that makes for, I don't know, like it enhances the redemption arc too, because, like it's, how do I say this? This is like, is this even an idea? Like it,
I'm
it
sure it is.
it creates nuance in people, and I think
Mhm.
part of like the whole redemption arc is like people are neither good nor bad inherently, and like we all have nuance and contradictions and all these things. And like humor just sort of like adds another like complexity to like the sort of like all of the weird contradictions that are like wrapped up in our journeys as people
Yeah.
and in love.
And
So,
I also think that like a lot of the situations that people find themselves in at the beginning of a relationship or when they're finding love, from the outside looking in, it's often very funny. Like sort of the awkwardness and how they sort of cope with everything. A lot of the meet cutes we see in romance novels, they're just kind of funny situations. So yeah.
I wonder if there is something that's like sort of wish fulfillment in that because like when you're actually in a meet cute, like it feels
Hmm.
embarrassing and terrible, So like
Yes.
hopefully from the outside it's like funny and adorable. So
Yeah, hopefully.
um the last question I have about your books is
Yes.
about the covers because they are absolutely beautiful. You're working with one of my favorite artists in the game right now. Can you
Oh,
tell me about
wonderful,
that
Roxy.
collaboration?
Yeah. My covers, people always ask me how much input do you have into your covers, and I am so lucky because I have no sort of visual ability at all. And like my debut, the vampire hanging upside down in the window, like that was not my idea. I've given very bare bones sort of physical descriptions to my team at Berkeley and to my cover artist, and they've just come up with masterpieces. I am so fortunate. Like I have no more words to describe it. Like I love my covers so much. And yes, I am biased, but I also think they're just objectively great. I
Yeah.
really love them.
Roxy does amazing work, and I think they tell you so much about the characters and like the dynamics between them, and just like the
Hmm.
color palettes, and oh, it's just all so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes. No, I adore them.
So, what is next for you? I know that it's hard sometimes for writers to talk about like what's in the works, but are you writing right now?
I am. I actually am sort of living and breathing my fourth book, which because it's due on October 20th to my editor. We're leaving vampires behind, but I can't seem to quit the idea of a male love interest who's not alive. So it's going to be a Grim Reaper romance, and it's coming out, knock on wood, roughly a year from now-ish, probably late September, early October. And the working title is Love You to Death. And it's my least descriptive, like it's my least kind of this is what the book is about title. But I'm really excited for this one and I can't wait to be able to talk more about it.
Well, I'm very excited for that. And I hope you listeners go out and pick up Road Trip with a Vampire and its two predecessors while you're at it if you haven't read them, because Let's Make Sure Love You to Death or whatever it ends up being called happens. I am very excited to read that. Thank you for taking the time, especially with such a looming deadline, to talk to us.
Of course. Thank you so much for reaching out.
No problem. All right, so you can pick up Road Trip with a Vampire once again at your favorite bookstore or library website. Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people?
So if you order through Parnassus Books in Nashville, you'll get a signed copy if that's something that you like.
That's
So
perfect. Excellent. All right, well, thank you again.
thank you.
Thank you, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.